It was a Monday morning in early October when I first noticed the cracks. I had just stepped out to fetch the mail. The air was thick with that metallic scent the soil gives off before a storm, though the sky was still that flat suburban blue. I wasn't looking for anything strange. I'd lived here 5 years and had come to expect nothing more dramatic than overgrown hedges and HOA warning letters. But that morning, something in the earth looked wrong. There was a hairline fracture snaking through the concrete sidewalk near the lot the HOA had recently cleared for their legacy project, a grand 2-story clubhouse with a wraparound deck and underground storm shelter. The crack stretched like a vein down the curb and disappeared into the lot's edge, right where they had leveled the last of the wild grass. I crouched down, ran my fingers along the jagged path. It wasn't just a superficial break in the concrete. It was the kind of split that comes when the ground underneath shifts. Most people would have missed it. But I wasn't most people. Back when my hands still bore calluses and my knees cracked like gunshots, I worked for a federal geological response unit. Earth movement, subsoil saturation, and slope integrity were the language I spoke. I'd walked landslides and mudflows from California to Colorado, and I knew what slow disaster looked like. This wasn't cosmetic, it was foundational. I walked the perimeter of the lot, my boots crunching over loose gravel, freshly laid, where the HOA had already cut into the slope. The dirt was too loose, too disturbed. The root systems were all gone. Nothing to hold the soil together once the rains came. I looked up toward the ridge behind it, a shallow incline, yes, but one that had taken centuries to form. You don't shave off a corner of a ridge without consequences. Water always remembers where it's been. And if you give it enough time and pressure, it'll carve its memory straight through your living room. That night, I didn't sleep. I went into the attic, found my old file boxes, and dug out my FEMA maps, my soil reports, my past case studies. I scanned the HOA newsletter they dropped in every mailbox a week earlier, their proud announcement of breaking ground on the future of our community, with a photo of President Barbara Halstead standing on the freshly cleared dirt in a bright red pantsuit. I highlighted the location. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a report. It felt strange at first, like putting on an old uniform. But the language came back. I ran slope angle simulations, scanned satellite imagery for topographic changes, and compared it to historical runoff data from the last 6 years. By sunrise, I had a 17-page packet with annotated maps, photographs, and a clear warning. High risk of subsurface instability construction may trigger accelerated soil failure in Zone 3B. Zone 3B was the lot they were building on. My lot safe. Built on bedrock, which is why I bought it in the first place. I printed 5 copies. At the HOA office that morning, Barbara's assistant, a young man named Trent, with perfect teeth and no spine, told me she was in a closed-door budget session. I told him it wasn't about the budget. It was about ground failure. He sighed, took the folder from me, and said he'd pass it along. I don't think he even looked at it. That afternoon, I watched as bulldozers arrived. Big yellow beasts with HOA logos painted on their sides. They rumbled onto the lot like kings ready to claim a throne, their teeth scraping into the hill I'd just warned about. And the worst part, neighbors gathered to cheer them on. Some even brought lawn chairs and iced tea like it was a show. I stood at my window, report in hand, watching them clap as the machines scraped deeper and deeper into the slope. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail, not about my report, but a fine. 75 violation, unauthorized interference with HOA operations. They accused me of trespassing onto the clubhouse site. Never mind that it was an open construction zone. Never mind that I had warned them in writing that what they were doing could endanger lives and property. They didn't care. Or worse, they thought I was crazy. The fine wasn't what bothered me. I could pay that in a heartbeat. What got to me was the tone, the condescension, the way they dismissed not just the data, but me, a man who had once briefed governors during crisis-level emergencies. I went back to the lot 3 days later this time, from the other side where the storm drains ended, and I found something that made my stomach twist. The new excavation had cut directly into a secondary water path. A dry trench, now sure, but anyone who understood the hydrology of the region knew what it would become in the rainy season, a funnel. And they'd just dug into it. No retention walls, no soil stabilization, no gravel lock, nothing. It would take one strong storm to turn that lot into a drainage basin. And that legacy clubhouse, it would be a monument to ignorance or a tomb. I didn't walk into that HOA meeting expecting applause. I just didn't expect to be humiliated. It was held in the community rec center, a bland box of drywall and beige carpet that always smelled like stale coffee and Lysol. The kind of place where well-manicured egos came to sit in plastic chairs and pretend they governed something important. I arrived 10 minutes early, wearing my old windbreaker, and carrying a folder stuffed with diagrams and overlays, real evidence. Scientific, annotated, indisputable. Barbara Halstead stood near the podium beaming in that politician's way of pretending to know everyone. Her pearls sat tight against her throat like a noose. She glanced at me and gave a stiff nod as if she couldn't quite remember my name, but recognized I wasn't one of the friendly ones. I signed up to speak during resident comment period. I was third on the list right after a guy who wanted permission to paint his fence beige instead of taupe, and a woman who begged them to ban her neighbor's wind chimes. The audience chuckled at those. Then it was my turn. I walked to the microphone and cleared my throat. My name is Raymond Ellis. I live on Ridgeview Circle. I'm here to address the proposed construction of the HOA Clubhouse on Parcel 3B. A few people perked up, most didn't. I opened my folder and held up a map. This document is a topographic soil risk overlay based on slope angle drainage flow and subsoil saturation metrics taken from both FEMA and historical survey data. I've worked in geological hazard mitigation for over 2 decades, and I'm telling you plainly building on that site is a catastrophic mistake. There was a pause. Then Barbara raised a brow, her voice syrupy, sweet. Mr. Ellis, are you a licensed engineer with the state of North Carolina? I nodded. Formerly federal. Department of Geological Emergency Response. I've led evaluations from New Mexico to Tennessee. I see. And have you submitted your concerns through the proper HOA feedback form, or are we just freelancing tonight? A few chuckles rippled through the room. I held up the sealed envelope I'd left with her assistant days ago. I already submitted it. With supporting documentation, I haven't received a response. Barbara smiled like a cat in front of a cage full of birds. Well, I apologize if there was a delay. Trent is new. But I'm sure the developers the board contracted actual licensed professionals have already done their due diligence. I knew the name of the firm. I'd looked them up. They specialized in golf courses and luxury pools, not land stability. I kept my voice steady. With respect, the reports they submitted did not include any subsurface hydrology modeling. They didn't even account for the latent runoff from the ridge during seasonal rainfall. I've done the modeling. It's here. If you keep excavating that slope, we'll give. I'm not guessing. I'm warning you. Barbara let out a tight, amused laugh. Mr. Ellis, I understand that you have strong feelings about this, but if we halted every project based on someone's personal opinion, it's not an opinion I cut in sharper than I meant to, it's physics. That's when the audience shifted. You could feel it, that almost imperceptible tilt of mood. I was no longer just an annoying neighbor. I was the aggressive man with the charts. I saw one board member, Jonathan, I think, lean over and whisper something to Barbara. She nodded, then turned back to me, still smiling. We appreciate your passion, Mr. Ellis, but unless you're prepared to file a formal injunction with the city, I suggest you let the licensed experts handle it. Then she turned to the audience. Any other comments tonight? No, great. Let's move on. And just like that, I was dismissed. I stood there for a moment, still holding the map like a fool left talking after the music stopped. My chest burned with a kind of heat I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, exactly. Something older, something deeper. A man behind me leaned over as I walked back to my seat. Don't take it personally, he whispered. She does that to everyone. I didn't reply. Because it wasn't just personal. It was reckless. It was criminal. And it would cost them. As I left the room, I overheard Barbara laughing with another board member in the hallway. Did you see the way he clutched those papers? Poor guy's been reading too many disaster novels. Probably lonely. That house of his has been quiet ever since. She didn't finish the sentence, but I didn't need her to. They knew. They knew what I'd lost. My wife and daughter had died in a mountainside collapse 14 years ago. Vacation rental, heavy rain, poorly built retaining wall. They were eating breakfast when the earth took them. That pain had rewired me. It had also made me relentless when I smelled risk, and I smelled it now. Rotting in the soil beneath that cleared lot. I tried to let it go. I really did. I told myself I had done my part. But 2 days later, when the bulldozers returned and started digging into the slope with even more force, louder, faster, as if to prove something I knew, they weren't just ignoring me. They were daring the ground to collapse. And the ground, it remembers. It always does. Most people around here knew me as the quiet man in the brick house near the edge of Ridgeview Circle. They saw me trimming hedges, walking my Labrador Miko, or standing silently at the edge of my yard during neighborhood events, never really joining in. Kids didn't knock on my door during Halloween. I didn't attend HOA barbecues. I wasn't unfriendly, just absent. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't always like this. Before I moved to this neighborhood before Ridgeview Circle and manicured lawns and fluorescent HOA newsletters, I lived in Colorado. My wife Dana and I had bought a cabin on a wooded slope outside of Estes Park, our dream retreat. Our daughter Lily had just turned 7. She used to call it our castle in the sky. It was mid-March when the rain came that year. I had read the forecast. They said heavy rain, nothing more. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the radio playing softly, Lily coloring a unicorn with pink and silver crayons, while Dana sipped tea. Outside, the rain fell in sheets soaking the hillside, but I didn't think much of it. Then the ground shook. At first, it was subtle, like a truck passing. But then it came again, deeper, heavier. The kind of vibration you feel in your bones. Miko started barking. I rushed to the window and saw it, a wall of mud and rocks sliding through the trees, snapping branches like matchsticks. I ran. I yelled for Dana, grabbed Lily by the arm, but we weren't fast enough. The slide tore through the back of the house like a wave made of earth. The floor buckled beneath us. I lost my grip on Lily. The noise, it was like a freight train, and a scream rolled into one. I remember falling. Then nothing. I woke up in a hospital with 4 broken ribs and a punctured lung. They told me my wife and daughter had died instantly. The rescue crew found Dana beneath what used to be our bedroom. Lily was deeper, 10 feet under, still clutching that silver crayon. The guilt became my anchor. I should have seen it. I was the expert. I knew slopes. I knew water. I should have known the land was too saturated. I should have gotten them out sooner. The should-haves clawed at me for years. I buried myself in my work. I joined disaster response teams. I flew to Oregon, to Texas, to Washington State, helping communities assess landslide risks, building early warning systems, advocating for stricter building codes. I thought if I could save someone else's family, maybe that would make up for losing mine. Eventually, I burned out. My body gave in before my mind did. The surgeries, the chronic pain, they piled up, so I retired early and moved east to this quiet, leafy suburb. Ridgeview seemed safe, flat enough, predictable. I thought I'd found peace. Until that lot. Until that crack in the sidewalk. Until that woman in pearls laughed at my warning like it was some neighborhood superstition. What Barbara and her HOA board didn't understand was that this wasn't theoretical to me. I'd stood in the mud, holding my daughter's muddy shoe. I'd shoveled through what used to be my living room, looking for a heartbeat I never heard again. So when I stood on the edge of that clubhouse site and saw the way the ground shifted beneath the weight of their trucks, I didn't just see soil mechanics. I saw ghosts. I saw Lily's drawing of our cabin. I saw the hill opening again. And I saw myself standing in the middle of another preventable tragedy, screaming into a room full of people who wouldn't listen. I went back to the folder. I pulled out the one report I hadn't shown Barbara. It was a hydrological map compiled during my time with the federal team. It showed a history of secondary water veins beneath this region. Invisible arteries that only filled during years of heavy saturation, years like this one. The lot they were building on sat directly above one of those veins. It had been dry for over a decade. That's what made it dangerous. People forget land has memory, and memory always returns when the water does. That night, I sent the report to the city planning department, not the HOA, the city. I didn't know if they'd act on it, but I had to try something. I wrote a cover letter explaining who I was, what I'd found, and what could happen if they didn't stop the construction. I signed it not just with my name, but with Lily's in memory in warning. Then I sat at my dining table with a whiskey and stared at the blinking cursor of my email for a long time before finally hitting send. They still didn't know. They didn't know who I'd been. But they would know what it cost me to stay silent once before. And I wasn't going to make that mistake again. I didn't hear anything back from the city for over a week. No confirmation email, no follow-up call. Just silence. In the meantime, the construction site bloomed like a cancer across the slope. By mid-November, steel reinforcements were being laid, concrete was poured, and the clubhouse's foundation was already half-formed, a scar of gray and rebar jutting from the earth like defiance. It was as if they were accelerating the project just to spite me. Barbara stood at the edge of the lot one morning, clipboard in hand, grinning for a photographer from the local lifestyle magazine. The banner behind her read, "Future home of the Ridgeview Community Legacy Center." Legacy. I wondered how legacy would look when the slope gave way and dragged all of that polished ambition into the ravine below. That same day, I received another letter from the HOA. This one was more aggressive than the last. On final notice, resident Raymond Ellis is in violation of the HOA covenant under Section 4.3, Disruption of Operations and Community Harmony. Continued interference will result in legal action, including but not limited to property lien court injunction and revocation of voting privileges. They had moved past fines. Now they were threatening to take my home. I called their bluff at first. I knew they didn't have legal grounds, but still the sheer boldness of it caught me off guard. They weren't just trying to silence me anymore. They were trying to erase me. I walked into the HOA office the next morning with the letter in hand. Trent, the intern or assistant or whatever he was, looked up with a nervous smile. "Mr. Ellis, Barbara isn't in today." I set the letter on his desk. "I want to know who authorized this. I want a copy of the bylaw they're citing. And I want to see the HOA's insurance declaration for geological disaster coverage." He blinked at me like I'd spoken another language. "You want insurance declarations?" "Yes. If they're breaking ground on a structure above a known slide zone, they need specialized coverage. If they don't have it, they're not just negligent, they're liable, personally." He swallowed hard. "I'll let her know." I walked out, but not before I noticed something chilling on the bulletin board by the door. It was a list of residents under compliance review. My name was at the top, in red ink, circled. Below it, unkempt yard, inspection scheduled. Suspicious drone activity. Possible misuse of architectural paint guidelines. Paint guidelines. They were digging into every part of my record, fishing for anything they could twist into leverage. And the drone accusation, that was rich. I hadn't flown one in years, not since FEMA grounded all their local surveillance due to privacy lawsuits. But facts didn't matter. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. That weekend, 2 compliance officers, HOA volunteers with neon vests and clipboards, showed up on my lawn. One of them even pulled out a tape measure to check the height of my grass. I stood on the porch with my arms crossed as they pretended not to see me. "You really want to play this game?" I called out. The taller one, a man I vaguely recognized as Barbara's neighbor, didn't answer. Just scribbled something, took a photo of my mailbox, and moved on. By Monday, I had received 3 separate violation notices. 1. Overgrown hedges exceeding height limit by 2 inches. 2. Unapproved outdoor structure, my weather monitoring station. 3. Non-compliant trim color. Apparently the shade of gray I repainted the shutters was not pre-approved. It was textbook harassment, but I wasn't helpless. I had fought against worse than HOA paper pushers. So I did what I'd been trained to do in the field: document everything. I installed cameras on my property. I made copies of every notice, every timestamp, every photograph. I wrote a detailed chronology of interactions, names, quotes, and dates. I wasn't building a defense. I was building a case. Then came the whisper campaign. Neighbors I used to chat with at the mailbox began avoiding me. The friendly woman who jogged with her golden retriever each morning crossed the street to avoid my driveway. One afternoon at the grocery store, I heard a man murmur, "Isn't that the guy who threatened to sue the HOA?" Threatened. I had never uttered the word lawsuit, but Barbara had, and she'd clearly planted the seed. I caught her at the mailboxes one morning. She smiled falsely warm. "Raymond, I hope you're feeling better. These community disputes can be stressful. You've been talking about my mental health." She laughed softly. "Just concerned. People say you've been yelling at construction workers, that you're flying drones again. We're all a little on edge. Tell your people to stay off my lawn," I said, and walked away. Behind me, she called out, "The board will be discussing your voting privileges next month. You should attend." if you're feeling up for it. The threat was clear: be quiet or be exiled. I stood on my porch that night and stared at the half-built skeleton of the clubhouse. They had poured more concrete, dug deeper. I saw the backhoe at the edge of the slope, its arms swinging lazily, pushing earth with the indifference of machines that don't have to bury their dead. They were so proud of what they were building, but I could feel it, the ground vibrating beneath their arrogance. And deep below, I knew the land was already moving. I sat at my desk past midnight with the only light coming from my laptop screen, and a small lamp in the corner casting long shadows across the room. My hands hovered over the keyboard, bones aching in that familiar way, a reminder of both age and the landslide that nearly killed me. I hadn't planned on taking it further. Not past the city planner's inbox, not past the polite, meaningless silence I'd received in return. But the HOA had escalated, and I could feel the pressure rising in the soil in the community and inside my own chest. I opened a new email and addressed it to 5 separate recipients. The Office of Building Inspection and Safety, the County Civil Engineering Review Board, the Department of Environmental Integrity, my state representative's office, a former colleague at FEMA, now Regional Liaison for Disaster Risk. I attached every document: geological overlays, photos of fissures, time-lapse satellite shots showing soil displacement over the last 6 weeks, even the threatening letters from the HOA. But more than that, I told them a story. I told them about my wife and daughter, about the cabin, the mud, the silence that follows when the ground opens and swallows everything you love. I didn't write it for pity. I wrote it because numbers don't always shake people awake, stories do. I clicked send. Then I printed the same packet, made 5 bound copies, and walked them to every doorstep along Ridgeview Circle the next morning, sliding them beneath doormats and taped to mailboxes. I didn't hide. I didn't write anonymously. On the front page was my name, my credentials, and a single sentence in bold: "You deserve to know what the HOA is risking on your behalf." By noon, the neighborhood group chat, the one I was never added to, exploded. Screenshots were forwarded to me by an old veteran neighbor, Tom, who'd always liked to swap war stories over fence repairs. Is this guy serious? He's mentally unstable, right? I heard his family died in a landslide. No wonder he's paranoid. Why is he dragging FEMA into this? Barbara says he faked those maps. But there were other messages too. Wait, I saw those cracks he's talking about. My kids play on that slope. I want answers. Why didn't the HOA mention this risk? I'm calling the city. It had begun. The illusion of control that the HOA clung to, the cultivated image of competence and composure, was cracking, like the sidewalk outside their precious construction site. The next day, someone rang my doorbell. It wasn't Barbara. It was a reporter. Young guy. Name was Caleb. Said he freelanced for a regional paper and saw my letter making the rounds online. Apparently, one of the homeowners had scanned and posted it. "I don't mean to intrude," he said, "but would you be willing to talk off record at first?" I paused, then nodded. I didn't want fame. I wanted protection. If I disappeared from the conversation, they'd erase everything. But if my face, my name, and my facts were public, they couldn't touch me without consequences. We sat on my porch as the wind shifted through the trees and the echo of construction equipment rumbled a few blocks away. "I heard they threatened you," Caleb said after flipping through my file. "With legal action." "They threatened my silence," I corrected. "That's worse." He glanced at the documents again, his brows furrowed. "This is solid work. You're not just some guy shouting on Facebook. These are federal-level reports." "I helped write some of those standards," I said quietly. "I used to be the guy people listened to before they poured concrete." He looked up at me. "So what happened?" I looked out toward the horizon where the trees broke just enough to catch a glimpse of the new clubhouse skeleton rising too fast. They stopped listening. The next day, the article came out. Former federal engineer warns of geological risk at Ridgeview clubhouse site. It wasn't front-page news, not yet, but it was enough. Enough for the HOA to feel the tremor. That same afternoon, a letter appeared on my door, not in an envelope, just taped there like a message from the mob. Was cease and desist. Your actions constitute libel, defamation, and interference with a sanctioned community project. Failure to comply will result in legal escalation. No signature, no HOA letterhead, just fear masquerading as power. I scanned it, filed it, and called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, my sister's son Jordan, who had just made partner at a firm specializing in real estate and HOA litigation. We hadn't spoken in a while, not since Lily's funeral. But when I explained what was happening, he didn't hesitate. "You've got the documentation?" he asked. "Yes." "And their threats. Everything's recorded." "Good," he said. "Then let's play by their rules legally." That night, I watched the sky shift from purple to black clouds rolling low and slow like a promise. The air smelled like wet stone and iron, like the earth itself was bracing. Rain was coming. So was truth. Rain in Ridgeview didn't come gently. It came in long, wind-driven lashes, sudden, harsh, and unapologetic. The kind of rain that peeled paint off mailboxes, turned yards into swamps, and made you second-guess every decision you'd made about outdoor wiring. The first real storm of the season hit 2 weeks after I sent the evidence. And still they kept digging. HOA crews, emboldened, maybe desperate, rushed to finish what they'd started. The foundation for the clubhouse had already been poured, a thick gray mass of concrete resting atop earth that no longer trusted its own shape. They worked through the downpour under tarps, floodlights, and false confidence. They were racing nature, and nature doesn't play fair. I stood at the edge of my driveway umbrella, barely holding, as a crew truck backed up the hill and spilled out men in ponchos and hard hats. They were unloading pallets of stone, likely for the patio Barbara had so proudly described in her HOA update. A timeless space overlooking the valley, perfect for resident gatherings, yoga mornings, and annual potlucks. I had to laugh. Yoga mornings. On a slope that whispered collapse with every drop of water soaking deeper into its gut. I watched mud slide from under their boots, gathering at the storm drains, already choking with runoff. The lot was a shallow bowl, and the drains meant to redirect excess water weren't enough. They'd underestimated the slope's thirst, or ignored it. That night, I checked my weather station. Soil saturation 93%. Slope shift 0.6 inches. Groundwater movement increasing. I wasn't guessing anymore. This was empirical. The land was sliding. I drafted one more warning this time, with more urgency, more bite. I sent it to the city council, attached video from the security camera, showing a visible sink developing just 15 feet from the clubhouse foundation. I even added a time-stamped snapshot, a worker's boot sinking ankle-deep into what looked like solid ground. But by then the silence had changed. It wasn't indifference anymore, it was fear. A day later, an assistant city inspector, Ramirez, I think his name was, called me from a private line. "I read your submission," he said, voice low. "But I was told to stand down." "By whom?" Pause. No names, just higher up. I could hear the reluctance in his throat. The weight of someone who knew truth, but also knew paychecks. "Look," he said off the record, "I'd keep records of everything. And don't stand too close to that hill." Then he hung up. It felt like being back in the field just before a slide, the air electric with tension, the ground too quiet. You don't always hear the earth move. Sometimes you just feel it, in the soles of your shoes, in your ribs. The next morning, the sky cracked open again. Thunder boomed over Ridgeview, shaking windows and rattling every picture frame in my house. I sat at the kitchen table watching rain pummel the back patio. Miko paced nervously near the door. At 7:04 a.m., a loud snap echoed down the street. I ran out barefoot. One of the retaining walls at the edge of the construction site had buckled. Concrete blocks spilled outward, and a thick slurry of water and mud gushed toward the street. The site foreman, a stocky man with a white hard hat, barked orders into his walkie-talkie, panic etched into every syllable. Workers scrambled like ants on a drowning mound. Still, Barbara arrived in her SUV. Still wearing heels, still pretending the storm was just a minor inconvenience. She marched through the rain umbrella held over her head by Trent, of all people, and scolded the crew for improper water channeling. Water channeling. The slope had shifted 3 inches in a day, and she was worried about channels. I took photos from the sidewalk, clear close-ups of the fractured base, the mud-tracked floor inside the clubhouse skeleton, the way the water was pooling near the southern edge where the land was softest. By noon, the first post appeared on the Ridgeview social feed. "Why is our HOA building collapsing before it's even finished?" Another soon followed. "My kid almost slipped into that mud trench this morning. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen." And then, Raymond Ellis warned us. We didn't listen. That last one wasn't from me. It was from a neighbor. A young father, I later learned, whose backyard bordered the project site. His name was Derek, and he'd been skeptical until the ground sank just behind his daughter's swing set. He came to my door that evening soaked, holding a copy of the file I'd left in his mailbox weeks earlier. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought you were just some bitter old guy, but you were right." I nodded, not smugly, just sadly. "Now what?" he asked. I looked past him toward the lot. The rain had eased, but the sky still held its breath. Now I said we wait for the land to speak louder. And sure enough, it would. Because all the warning signs, the shifting, the swelling, the hairline, fractures widening beneath a rush of arrogance, were no longer subtle. They were a countdown, and the clock was ticking. It happened sometime between midnight and 300 a.m. The night was eerily still, as if even the trees were holding their breath. I had just finished logging my daily soil readings, and Miko was asleep at the foot of my recliner. The rain had subsided hours earlier, but the damage was already done. Saturation had reached 97%. Ground pressure was peaking. The southern corner of the lot, where they'd ignored every one of my red flags, had already started to dip. I stood in the dark, peering out my front window toward the unfinished clubhouse. At first glance, everything looked intact. The scaffolding stood. The poured walls held. The floodlights they left behind were still buzzing faintly, casting long shadows across the slick ground. But I knew better. Soil failure doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It creeps. It shifts like a whisper underfoot. And by morning, it screams. I woke up around 3:10 a.m. to the sound of a deep, gut-punching thud. Not an explosion. Not thunder. Something heavier. Something final. I bolted upright. Miko was already barking nails, scrambling against the hardwood floor as he sprinted to the front door. I threw on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped into the chill. The air was thick with fog and the raw metallic tang of wet earth. When I rounded the corner at the edge of my yard and looked toward the lot, I stopped dead. The southern end of the lot had sunk a wide depression where the land had dropped nearly 2 feet. What used to be a level pad of gravel and concrete now looked like a warped sheet of paper curling in at the edges. Rebar jutted from the concrete like broken bones. The foundation had fractured in 3 places, long jagged tears that split the slab like lightning scars. One wall had buckled inward, another had separated entirely from its base. But the most alarming sight, a fissure, a black empty space running from the edge of the slab straight into the wooded slope beyond a literal wound in the earth, maybe 6 inches wide, maybe more depending on how deep it went. I walked toward it, carefully testing each step. The soil gave slightly under my weight, spongy, unstable. I knelt near the fissure and lowered my flashlight. The beam disappeared into darkness. That wasn't a surface crack. It was a void, and it meant the subsoil had already started to fail. I took photos. Every angle, every fracture, every measurement. My hands were shaking not from fear but from adrenaline. This was the moment I dreaded. The moment I had tried everything to stop. And now it was here, and no one could ignore it anymore. At 7:45 a.m., the first worker arrived. He pulled up in a red pickup radio, on coffee in hand. I watched from my porch as he parked and got out, whistling casually. He took 3 steps toward the southern edge before his foot caught in the shifting gravel, and he fell sideways with a startled yelp. He scrambled up, cursing. Then he saw the fissure. I saw his expression change from confusion to horror. He pulled out his phone and started dialing furiously. Within an hour, HOA board members started arriving. Barbara was last, naturally. Her SUV pulled up and idled for a while before she emerged in a navy windbreaker and rubber boots. She walked up to the edge of the sink with deliberate steps, as if somehow her pace would change the reality. She turned to Trent and snapped, "Get a contractor on site, now." "I already did," he said. "They're on their way." She glanced over and saw me standing at the edge of my yard. Our eyes met. For the first time, she didn't smirk. She didn't say anything, but her face said enough. She knew. Later that afternoon, a city engineer arrived. He was quiet, precise, took measurements, walked the slope, snapped photos. He didn't ask questions, just took notes. His badge read Inspection and Integrity Division. By evening, yellow caution tape circled the entire site. The HOA tried to spin it. A flyer went out that night. Routine geological assessment to ensure continued safety of community development. Routine. I'd nearly choked when I read it. That same night, I got a knock on my door. It was Derek, the young father, who'd once avoided me. "I saw the crack," he said, voice low. "My daughter plays near there. We need to stop this." I invited him in. We went over the files together. I showed him the FEMA maps, the projected landslide zones, the void detection scan I'd commissioned out of pocket years ago that had revealed subterranean weaknesses under the lot. He leaned back in his chair, stunned. "Why didn't the HOA know this?" "They did," I said. "They just didn't care." He looked at me. "What can we do?" "Make noise," I replied. "Loud legal noise." By the next morning, a small crowd had gathered near the caution tape. 10 neighbors, then 20, holding signs. "Stop the clubhouse. Listen to the science. We stand with Raymond." I didn't organize it, but I stood with them. Barbara called the police, of course. Said we were trespassing, disrupting a community site. 2 officers showed up. They were polite, clearly uncomfortable. One of them, an older guy, with a silver mustache, pulled me aside. "Between you and me," he said, "I've seen worse cover-ups than this, but not many. Will you report what you saw?" He hesitated. "You keep documenting. That's your best weapon." So I did. I uploaded the footage to a private drive, time-stamped every photo, recorded every conversation. I wasn't waiting for the HOA to collapse under its own lies. I was preparing for when the earth would do it for them. And it was close now. I could feel it deep under the crust, like a breath being held just a moment too long. It began the way disaster often does, with silence. A strange, unnatural quiet settled over Ridgeview that morning, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. There were no hammers ringing out from the construction site, no diesel engines growling, no HOA volunteers knocking on doors with their usual clipboard smiles, just a thick stillness under a sky the color of raw lead. I woke up before sunrise. The dog hadn't barked. The birds hadn't sung. My chest felt heavy, not from illness, but from instinct. The kind of weight that used to hit me hours before a slide in the mountains. When the wind changed, when the ground tensed. I stepped out onto the porch. Miko followed close, tail low. The clubhouse still stood crooked, lopsided, but standing. A skeleton of ambition girders, wet with 3 days of rain foundation, cracked in too many places to count. I checked my monitors. Soil shift 2.3 inches overnight. Saturation 100%. Groundwater pressure red zone. It was coming. At 7:41 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "They're having an event this morning. Ribbon cutting. 8 a.m. No joke." I stared at the message. Ribbon cutting. With the foundation fractured. They were out of their minds. But Barbara wasn't out of hers. She was desperate. She needed to show strength. The media coverage had started turning. The community protest had grown. People were beginning to doubt the board, question the budget, the motives. And worse, they were listening to me. She needed a distraction, so she made a show. I watched from across the street as the first residents began arriving. Maybe 24. Most had umbrellas. A few brought folding chairs. Trent scurried about with a clipboard, setting up a portable speaker system near the edge of the cracked patio. He tried to tape a bright blue banner between 2 posts, but the wind kept catching it, flapping like a warning flag no one read. Barbara arrived last, of course. White blouse, navy blazer, hair sprayed into an immovable shell. She stood on a small stage they'd constructed, probably borrowed from the elementary school, and smiled at her audience like a queen surveying her village. No one mentioned the giant fissure 5 feet behind her. She raised the mic. "Today marks a new chapter in Ridgeview's story," she began, voice amplified and too cheerful for the sky above. "A symbol of what we can build when we come together." Her words became background noise to me. All I could focus on was the ground beneath her. A subtle shift, a tremble I felt in my shoes. I whispered no, and then it happened. It began with a snap, not loud, just sharp, like a dry branch breaking. Then another. Then the sound deepened, a low groan from the earth, as if the slope itself was exhaling after holding tension too long. Someone screamed. Barbara turned. Her eyes went wide. The southern corner of the foundation collapsed in an instant, a whole section of slab vanishing into the yawning earth. A loud, sickening crack echoed across the neighborhood as the rebar snapped like spaghetti. The banner tore away and vanished into the chasm. People ran. Some slipped in the mud. Others dropped umbrellas and trampled chairs. Trent tried to help an elderly woman off the stage before the entire platform lurched and tilted sideways, sending them both sprawling. I was already running toward the crowd, my boots splashing through puddles, yelling, "Away from the edge! Back up now!" A second collapse came seconds later, this one worse. The north wall caved inward. The roof supports buckled. A section of the framing crumpled and folded like cardboard. Dust and rain mingled in the air, turning into a misty fog of panic. Barbara screamed. I saw her crawl away from the edge, just as the ground beneath where she'd stood. A full 2 feet slow at first, then fast, like a trapdoor opening. I grabbed Derek, who was trying to pull a woman out from behind a stack of fallen metal poles. We dragged her clear. As the third and final collapse took the rest of the foundation, the center of the lot gave way entirely, a wide sinkhole opening, like the earth had swallowed a bite of concrete and wasn't done chewing. The rain started again, soft at first, then harder. We stood there soaked muddy and shaking, staring at the gaping wound in the hill. What had been a proud clubhouse site hours ago was now a pit. Not metaphorically, literally. A chasm at least 20 feet deep and growing. Small landslides continued to fall into it, from the surrounding soil carrying in bits of railing lumber, even the twisted remains of a commemorative bench. Sirens in the distance, blue lights flickering through the trees. Someone behind me whispered, "Oh my God." But I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sick. I'd known this was coming. I'd warned them again and again, and still I'd failed to stop it. Not because I was wrong, because they were too arrogant to listen. A fire truck arrived first, then EMTs, then 2 police cruisers. Paramedics rushed in with stretchers. A few people were treated for shock, one for a sprained ankle. No fatalities, somehow. I stood near the caution tape as the city engineer from before approached mud on his boots, face pale. "You were right," he said quietly. I didn't respond. Not with words, just a slow, tired nod. A news van pulled up an hour later. The reporter Caleb spotted me and jogged over. "Raymond," he said, breathless. "Did you see it happen?" I did. "Can I get a quote?" I looked past him at the smoking wreckage, the rain still carving lines through what remained of the earth's patience. Then I looked straight at him. Well, they built a legacy on a lie. The ground just told the truth. He didn't need a follow-up. He had his story, and I finally had mine. The morning after the collapse, Ridgeview didn't wake up, it came to. Like a dazed fighter sitting up in the ring, trying to understand how the knockout landed. The once pristine sidewalks were tracked with muddy footprints. Police tape sagged in the wind, and the clubhouse lot, now a smoking wound in the hill, sat cordoned off like a crime scene. Because that's exactly what it had become. By 9:00 a.m., news trucks outnumbered lawn care crews. By noon, drone footage of the collapse was on every local station. By dinner time, it hit national syndication. HOA clubhouse collapses during ceremony. Residents warned project was unsafe. Ignored warnings. Sinking dreams when homeowner associations overstep. He told them this would happen. Former federal engineer speaks out. My name was in the bylines now. My face too. The photo they used wasn't flattering. I looked weathered, tired, half smiling at the edge of the pit. But it didn't matter. The truth was out. And the board, they scrambled. Barbara was the first to issue a public statement. Standing before a podium hastily erected outside the HOA office, with a generic green backdrop and a stack of rehearsed lines, she said, "We are deeply saddened by the events that took place yesterday. Our top priority remains the safety and unity of our Ridgeview community. We will be working closely with city officials to determine the cause of this unfortunate incident." Unfortunate incident, as if a sinkhole had accidentally wandered onto her property like a stray cat. When pressed by a reporter about the multiple warnings, the geological assessments, the community protests, she tightened her jaw and said, those concerns were reviewed and found lacking in official merit. She wasn't just spinning, she was unraveling. Because what followed wasn't unity. It was blood in the water. Residents, once too passive or polite to speak out, began to unearth everything the HOA had done or failed to do. And a retired contractor revealed that no soil compaction tests had been filed for the foundation zone. Blower, a former temp assistant in the HOA office, emailed a cache of internal memos showing Barbara had ordered Trent to bury any opposition. The HOA's insurance provider dropped their policy the next day, citing willful negligence and breach of disclosure. And worst of all, A forensic geotechnical team confirmed what I'd said months earlier. The slope had a long dormant subsurface vein primed for collapse. The city council convened a special meeting. For the first time, I was invited to speak as an expert witness. I walked into that chamber in my old field jacket carrying the same folder I had handed to Trent months before. The same folder they had laughed at, mocked, ignored. This time every chair was filled. I spoke plainly, calmly. I outlined the timeline, the warnings, the data. I ended with one sentence. This was not an accident. It was a decision. The room went still. Barbara didn't attend. Her resignation was announced that night, a single paragraph emailed to residents with no apology, no admission. Just gone. Like she'd slipped through the fissure along with her clubhouse. But the reckoning wasn't finished. The city issued stop work orders on 3 other HOA projects. Investigations were launched into misappropriation of funds contractor kickbacks and unreported structural complaints. Civil lawsuits began stacking up like firewood. And me, I kept my distance. I wasn't looking for vengeance. I was looking for truth and maybe finally, peace. But it was strange. Neighbors who once whispered behind curtains now waved when I passed. Some even crossed the street to thank me. Derek mowed my lawn the following week without being asked. The older woman with the wind chimes brought over pie. A woman I barely knew knocked on my door one evening and handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. You saved lives. Thank you for not giving up even when we didn't believe you. I'm sorry it had to happen this way. Underneath the note was a drawing. Crayons. A hill. A man standing with a dog. And behind him, a cracked building sinking into the ground. At the top, scrawled in uneven handwriting. And the man who listened to the dirt. I don't know why, but I cried. Not a dramatic sob. Just quiet tears. The kind that come not from pain, but from the release of carrying something too heavy for too long. That night, I walked the edge of the ridge. The air was clean. The slope still wet, but settling. The wound was still there, but so was the sky. In the distance, I saw a single yellow excavator motionless under the moonlight, waiting. But no one was coming to finish the job. The land had spoken, and this time the world had listened. It's strange the way healing doesn't arrive all at once. There's no parade, no choir of angels, just silence. Then small things, a breath that doesn't catch a night where sleep comes easier, a morning where the sky looks more like possibility than pressure. Weeks passed after the collapse, then months. The sinkhole was filled eventually, though not by the HOA. The city contracted a geological restoration crew, who worked slowly and respectfully, layering gravel and reinforced soil, replanting native grass, consulting the very risk maps I'd begged them to read in the first place. They never rebuilt the clubhouse. The lot is now a quiet green space, no banners, no flags, no monuments. Just wild grass, and a small wooden sign that reads, Restoration Area, Do Not Disturb. I walk past it every morning with Miko. He doesn't bark at it anymore. The HOA, if you could still call it that, changed completely. Barbara vanished from the community. Her house was sold off market. Trent moved to Florida. The remaining board members either stepped down or were voted out. In their place, a new slate of residents stepped up, humble, cooperative, transparent. They asked me to serve on the board. I said no, not because I didn't care, but because I needed to let it go. I'd become the man who held the warning like a torch for so long I forgot how to stand in the light without it. But what surprised me most was what came from outside Ridgeview. Emails, letters, messages from across the state. Even some from other HOA-run communities who'd seen the footage, read the articles, and now questioned their own associations. People who wrote, and they've been threatening me for years. Thank you for showing we can fight back. How do I get access to the same geological data? You gave us courage. I never meant to be a symbol. I just didn't want anyone else to lose what I had. One afternoon in early spring, I was out front pruning the hedges when a little girl and her mother walked up the driveway. The girl was maybe 8 with curly hair and scuffed sneakers. She held something in her hands, a bundle wrapped in purple paper. Her mother smiled. Are you Mr. Ellis? I nodded. My daughter wanted to give you something. The girl stepped forward and handed me the bundle. I opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing, bright colors on thick paper. A house, a hill, a man with a dog, clouds in the sky, trees, grass, and in the center, a large smiling sun with a speech bubble that read, Thank you for keeping us safe. My throat closed up. The little girl looked at me and said, "My daddy said you saved our neighborhood. I think you're a good listener." Her mother added, "We lived near the south side of the lot." If that sinkhole had gone a few feet farther, she didn't finish. She didn't have to. I knelt down eye level with the girl. "What's your name?" "Sophie." "Thank you, Sophie. This means more than you know." She beamed. "You're welcome." They walked away, and I stood there with that drawing in my hand, the wind catching the edges of the paper, the colors bright even under the cloudy sky. Later that night, I framed it. It hangs above my desk now next to the old photos of Dana and Lily, not because it replaces them, but because somehow it stitches something shut. I still think about that cabin in the mountains, the morning the land took everything. But now when I remember it, I don't feel just the loss. I feel the promise I made to myself, to Lily, to the earth beneath our feet. Pay attention. Speak when no one else will. Stand your ground when the ground shakes. That promise saved a neighborhood. Maybe more. I may never get to rebuild what I lost. But I did build something. Not a clubhouse. Not a monument. Just a truth that couldn't be buried. And now when the wind moves through the grass on that once doomed lot, I don't hear warning anymore. I hear peace.